Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today I decided to do another top 10 video. Sometimes these are kind of fun, especially on sort of slow news days. And I decided this time around I was going to do my top 10 directors of all time. Now, these guys can be currently working, they can be dead for years, whatever. It's throughout the entire span of film. And the other thing is that this is not an objective list. This is a personal list. These are the directors that I personally find the most entertaining. And I'm going to give you kind of a few reasons why and highlight a couple specific films from each director just to kind of get the point across on why I place them in certain places and why I like them as directors. For objective reasons of liking them, not just because it's a thing like, oh, I don't like Uwe Boll because he makes horrible movies. He's not a good director. So without drudging that down too much, let's go into number 10. And number 10 is Christopher Nolan. Now, Nolan is probably the youngest director, I would say, on this list. He definitely has made his mark on Hollywood, and I like the aspects of his films. He has that very kind of realistic form of filmmaking where it feels like you're kind of walking around on a street corner type of thing with a lot of his movies, or wherever the depiction of the movie happens to be. It feels a lot more real in a Nolan film. Nolan makes very grounded movies. Even movies like Interstellar seem like they're grounded in some form of fact, even though it's a very outlandish science fiction story. It is still based in some form of theoretical physics, which is why it's still interesting for hardcore science fiction fans. So, just kind of going over the style that he does, it evolves from film to film. I go to The Dark Knight first because that was really one of his big breakthrough movies, and that allowed him to go make Inception afterwards. And The Dark Knight, I know a lot of people like to criticize. I know I have disagreements with several people on certain aspects of that film, but I really do enjoy Heath Ledger's Joker. I think it's probably one of the best on-screen depictions of it. I'd say Joaquin Phoenix's depiction definitely rivals it. So, it's up in the air whether he's the best Joker. I personally think Joaquin Phoenix probably edged him out a bit, but, I still do enjoy him in this film. He fits very well in the film. He has a purpose in the movie, and I think that's kind of what makes him different a little bit from the comic book Joker. Is he's kind of, I don't want to say straightforward, but you kind of understand what he's not like a mastermind. He's just in there to screw with stuff. He's basically a troll. Except he murders people and blows shit up. But I do enjoy him in the movie. Christian Bale is still good as Batman. He's coming back from Batman Begins, along with some of the other cast like Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine. So you're moving into this movie, and it really, most of the movie was shot with a blue filter, by the way. I want to point that out. At least I'm fairly certain it was. But I like this movie because at the time, it didn't follow the superhero trope, which I liked, and I still like, is that, Batman does not get the girl in the end. She gets blown the fuck up in at the end of the second act of the film. It doesn't give you that satisfaction, even though it kind of gives you that satisfaction in the next movie. But again, this feels a lot more like the darkest chapter out of the Dark Knight trilogy, because there's really not a happy ending for Batman. It's an ending that you kind of know has to happen, and Nolan explains why it has to happen basically through Jim Gordon at the end of that film. But it's not a happy movie at all. It's a very dark and brooding movie, and that's, I think, what makes it good as a Batman movie that's based in that Nolan type of universe that he wants to try and get as grounded as he can. Now, the action scenes in this are also fairly good, at least with the chase scenes. The physical combat in these movies has always been a little janky for me, but when you look at the stuff like, obviously the semi scene and stuff like that, the blowing up of the Batmobile, and eventually, the launch of the Bat Pod and stuff, so you have the Bat Cycle, all that stuff is great, and it was all, for the most part, was all practical. Again, amazing job by Nolan on that film, and then you move into Inception, and Inception takes it to an entirely different level. Now, I'm not as partial to Inception as I am to The Dark Knight or to Interstellar, but Inception, I have to admit, is still a good movie because it plays with your sense of reality. Because, again, Nolan's methodology is to make it seem real. So because it seems real, and because he's fucking with reality, that also seems real. So it kind of messes with the audience on a subconscious level, and I like that a lot. Leonardo DiCaprio, this is probably one of the few movies that I actually enjoyed him in to an extent. I actually kind of like some of the other supporting characters a little bit better than him, even though he's kind of the main plot around the story. But Inception's more about the ideas and the things that are being presented to you, I think, more than some of the characteristics. Leonardo DiCaprio is obviously the mainstay of the cast. He's the centerpiece, but the story mainly follows him. Again, even though I kind of do like some of the other side characters and they are a bit amusing, but the whole idea behind Inception is basically his story. So even though I'm seeing all these visuals, they're kind of tied to him. So it's a mixed bag for me because I'm not a really big DiCaprio fan overall. I like him in some films, so it's kind of meh for me. But then Interstellar, which was his film following that, or following The Dark Knight Rises, that film is amazing. That is one of my favorite science fiction films I have ever seen. I've gone over it in a movie spotlight. If you want any information on that, you can probably go there. I'm going to kind of skim over it a little bit, but Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, who again was coming over for this project from Dark Knight Rises, which she had been in as Catwoman. You have her coming in. Casey Affleck is in this. Jessica Chastain, Michael Caine, again, a Nolan regular at this point. There's so many people that are just in this movie, and they all want to be in the movie because it's a Nolan movie. And it's the same thing with some of his later films, too, like Dunkirk, and hopefully Tenet will be another one that's an instant classic. But Interstellar, again, one of my favorite science fiction movies. I count it as this generation's 2001. I love that film. But I'm spending a lot of time on number 10, and I want to go to number 9. And number 9 is Clint Eastwood. Now, Clint Eastwood, most people know... Well, most people today probably know him as a director, but most people back in the day knew him as an actor. And that's really more what I like in his directorial stuff. I'm not, I like Gran Torino. I think it's a great movie. I wouldn't say it's my favorite movie by him. Same thing with, like stuff like $1 Million Baby, or even the one he did recently, The Mule. All those are kind of real drama type of stories for the most part. But then I want to go back to the beginning. I want to go back to his first film, which is Play Misty for Me. Now that is a film that has Clint Eastwood in a role that we are not used to seeing him in as almost a victim, because he is being stalked by this lunatic who he basically plays this like midnight radio disc jockey, and he gets this stalker that keeps calling into him on the phone, and eventually she infiltrates her way into his life, and she's just this complete and utter lunatic. But it's an interesting thing to see Clint Eastwood in that role, because you're not used to it. You're used to him being the tough guy. He's shooting the bad guys and kicking ass and stuff. No, in this movie, he's running around from this little woman in this kind of like current like 70s bob type of haircut, just like with a knife trying to stab him in the head while he's sleeping. Oh god, it's an amazing ride. I love that film. And I love it because it's a bit different from some of his other filmography, and because he's still able to pull it off both in front of and behind the camera. Now, the next one, again, is one I highlighted in my movie spotlights section, which is High Plains Drifter. Now, High Plains Drifter is the best Clint Eastwood Western I've ever seen. He directed it. It was one of his early directorial things. Play Misty for Me was the first one, but this was, I don't think, not too long afterwards. But it's a dark Western. It's almost darkly and sickly comedic in some sections. Again, I've gone over it in the movie spotlight, so you can watch that if you want a really in-depth version of this. But High Plains Drifter just kind of does, it did something that a lot of Westerns did, even a lot of Clint Eastwood Westerns, which were kind of borderline with, the old ones, the John Wayne ones. Most of the time they were barely similar in a lot of cases. And with High Plains Drifter, it took it to an even another level and adds, the supernatural elements and stuff to it. The musical score in that is great to emphasize that kind of interesting. I think they use like a theremin or something in some of those later scenes, it's really interesting with the music matched to that scene. It's almost like an Italian horror film. It's kind of weird now that I think about it. But that, Clint Eastwood's character in that movie is great. He has his usual great one-liners. He kills all the bad guys and stuff like, well, I shouldn't say bad is kind of relative in this movie, but, you get the idea. Clint Eastwood still kicks ass, and it's interesting and different. I love that. And then you also move on to basically kind of a deconstruction of the Western versus a weird Western, which is Unforgiven, which was, I think, the last Western that Clint Eastwood had acted in, and he also directed that, and I believe that won Best Picture that year as well. But Unforgiven is it's a deconstruction of the idea of the classic Western. The classic Western is like, oh, the gunslinger, the cowboy comes along, he shoots all the bad guys, and spins his pistol and puts it back in the holster and just walks away. And in this, it's like, no, you have feeling, you have emotion when you take the life of another human being. It's more real than that. It's not just mindless murder. All the time. You have emotions that are attached to it. And there's an emotional story that's usually attached to all these things. And then at the end of it, they kind of just devolve back into the mindless killing machine. But that's there for a reason. It's there to show that's what kind of the dinosaur in that type of universe as people become more and more civilized in the West, where people like William Money are not the norm anymore. They are a fossil of a forgotten age. And even he's been kind of infected by this sort of this bug of kindness that's kind of come with age, softening him to an extent. But he reverts back to that old William Money at the end of it when he goes on the killing spree after Morgan Freeman gets killed. So, I love that about the movie. Again, Eastwood's character is easily the best one in the movie, even though Morgan Freeman does do a good job in his role as well as Ned. And I forget who plays the kid in that movie, the other one that comes with him, but he also does a very good job, as well as Gene Hackman as Little Bill. Just a whole great cast of people to be in a Western film. And like I said, that ending is what makes everything great, and that monologue that Clint Eastwood does. But like I said, I love Eastwood movies, but those three kind of always stood out to me to an extent. Now, number 8 is one that is a bit of a niche one, but I do love it, and that is Dario Argento. Now, Dario Argento is basically one of, if not the greatest Italian horror directors out of the big three. You had him, Bava, and Fulci, and really it's mostly a battle between Argento and Bava, and I think it's kind of neck and neck sometimes. When you stop and think about it and start analyzing all the films and stuff. But I want to go into 3 specific ones that I really enjoyed by him. One of them is kind of not a great film, but it is extremely memorable. But the first one I want to go into is often cited as his greatest film, and it's my favorite film by him, which is Suspiria. Now, the thing with Dario Argento movies is you don't need to be married to plot in them, because a lot of the time plot doesn't matter. Because Dario Argento doesn't really care all that much about plot. He cares about showing you odd and freakish images on screen and colorful and grotesque images on screen. And Suspiria feels almost like a Technicolor film. You have you're walking through a kaleidoscope on an acid trip type of a film. The hallways are just red and green. There's color. Everything is a bright and vibrant color. There's loud noises and creepy shadows and stuff everywhere. It's a movie that scares you on a visual level as opposed to an emotional level, although it can scare you a bit on an emotional level if you've never seen it. But it scares you more on just like the premise of like this environment would be terrifying to be in. Especially with the awkward and insane music that accompanies it, which is, I believe, done by Goblin, which also did his work on Deep Red, which is another film I'm going to talk about in a minute. But with the music and the visuals and the relatively good physical acting of all the actresses, it's a great movie. It's a great movie to sit down and watch. It's a great movie to sit down and watch while you're baked. I will say that wholeheartedly. Any Italian horror film is extremely fun to watch when you're stoned. But Suspiria is an amazing type of film when it comes to just that visual genre. And then you go over to Deep Red. Now, Deep Red's a little bit different. Deep Red also came before Suspiria, so maybe I should have talked about this first. But Deep Red, which is a more traditional giallo, it's a murder mystery starring David Hemmings and Daria Nicolodi, who would also become Dario Argento's girlfriend after that, and also give birth to one of his daughters. So Deep Red is basically this movie where this psychic, points somebody out in a crowd and then she is murdered. And this character is played by David Hemmings has to go solve the murder. And the plot line, like the through thread of what's happening in the movie, is kind of it's a bit of a jump to logic when you actually stop and think about like David Hemmings' progression through the plot. But the thing is when they actually do progress through the plot, it does feel kind of clever when you actually do see it. It's like, oh, David Hemmings is just a dipshit. This is complete dumb luck that he's getting this far. It's one of those type of things. But I like David Hemmings' acting in the film. He does a good job as kind of being this sort of, skittish, I don't want to say antisocial, but kind of like a nervous type of insecure sort of guy in the film, and he does a very good job of that. There's some interesting comedy in the film. There's a scene where he's sitting in a car and the seat falls down, and the sun shield keeps falling down in front of his face, and he keeps having to put it back up. There's some interesting little comedic elements in it too, which is kind of surprising for an Italian horror film. They're usually just completely zany and off the walls. But the other thing is Deep Red's climax. Again, if you don't notice certain things in the film, Deep Red's climax is legitimately a really good twist to a movie, and I'm not giving it away in this if you haven't seen the film. But now I'm going to go into another one that's a little bit lesser known of his, and I was debating between doing this film and Tenebrae, and I wound up going with this film instead because I felt it was a bit more memorable, especially with the kind of batshit insane ending it has. And that is Dario Argento's Phenomena, and this was kind of the movie that sort of made him step away from directing for a little bit, because this was actually a financial failure for him. And after this, he would go on to produce Lamberto Bava with Demons and Demons 2, but with Phenomena, it was a film that was it had Daria Nicolodi in it, who had been in Deep Red years before that. And basically the idea is there's this girl who's played by Jennifer Connelly, and she has this kind of ability to control insects to an extent and kind of like can do stuff with them, I guess. And they never really explain that. Again, it's an Italian horror film. You don't need to explain too much. And basically, the whole story is about her seeing these murders that are happening all around her, basically. And Donald Pleasence is also in this, too, by the way. It's a nice little cameo role for him, this would have been probably well into the Halloween sequel days. But Jennifer Connelly is kind of going around, and she knows Donald Pleasence and some other stuff. He's like an insect scientist. And it's just kind of them solving this mystery. Again, it's kind of like a Giallo, but it has a lot more supernatural elements to it. And I will say this, the ending is batshit insane. You need to watch the ending to understand it, because there is a point in the movie where there is a cue to what will happen at the ending. And that cue is located almost exactly 45 minutes before the actual fucking ending takes place. So if you remember what happened there by the time that movie ends, then you'll understand why there was a cue there. But that cue should have come a lot later in the film. But again, I like Phenomena. It's definitely the weakest on this list of three that I've given, but I still do love that film, and it's kind of neck and neck with me with Tenebrae. But now we're going to move down to number 7, and number 7 is, again, kind of a mainstay, which is Stanley Kubrick. And Stanley Kubrick, he was kind of like his friend Steven Spielberg, who actually appears later on this list, and he really was kind of an everyman type of director, a Renaissance director. He directed almost a little bit of everything, something in almost every genre. And again, I'm going to kind of highlight his entries into various genres, because none of these three films are in the same genre. And the first one, which is really one of my favorites, is Dr. Strangelove, and that is an amazing black comedy. That is a comedy that you can watch a dozen different times and laugh at a dozen different things that you may or may not have noticed the first time through. The rewatchability of Dr. Strangelove is almost infinite because of the things that you can notice in the movie, the little things that Stanley Kubrick just threw in there for shits and giggles to see if people would pick up on it, or some of the verbal stuff that they go through, where it's just, at the end of the movie, there's a guy that breaks in, his name is Sergeant Batguano, or Corporal Batguano, or something like that. It's like, you literally just name this guy Corporal Batshit. It's so kind of goofy when you actually break it down and look at it. The character of General Jack D. Ripper, all the tongue-in-cheek references, all the visual references, all the people that are walking around the airbase as, the world's about to get nuked, say pieces, they have signs that say peace is our profession, which is hilarious and counterintuitive to what we're seeing in the movie. Like I said, I love Dr. Strangelove. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time. And also, I can't, bring up this movie without mentioning Peter Sellers playing three different roles as Colonel Mandrake, President Humphrey, and Dr. Strangelove himself, who has the best line in the entire movie when his wheelchair-bound character proceeds to stand up from his wheelchair and scream, "Mein Fuhrer, I can walk," to himself playing the president. Again, amazing performances by him all around. And then you also have George C. Scott coming in as General Buck Turgidson, who, again, he kind of steals the show as well. All these characters steal the show in the scenes that they're in, and it's hilarious because it's just all these characters doing different things. And I keep forgetting, too, James Earl Jones is one of the co-pilots on the plane, or actually he might be the bombardier, and Slim Pickens is Colonel King Kong is the pilot. I mean, Slim Pickens from Blazing Saddles, which again is another movie that's going to get brought up later in this. So Doctor Strangelove has this amazing cast of funny people doing funny things, and it never ceases to amaze me what I can see in that film, watching it even now, and I've seen the film probably upwards of 50 or 60 times. So now we're going to move from that, and we're going to move to his other kind of really big film. Well, I shouldn't say other, because he had a lot of really big films, but 2001: A Space Odyssey. And 2001 is one of those movies that really sort of it solidified Kubrick in terms of the idea that this guy is what the movies that he makes are beyond anything else. And a lot of people get confused by 2001: A Space Odyssey, especially with the ending and stuff like that. And it's not really meant to be. It's not really meant to be literal. I don't think. He's not just walking into a room and all this stuff is happening. It's all meant to be metaphorical. But I think Kubrick may have just been doing that so people can draw their own conclusions. It makes a bit more sense when you actually look at it that way. But 2001 is not meant to be like a literal allegory for most of it. A lot of it is just meant to be, again, kind of like Dario Argento a little bit. The idea that the visuals are actually meant to kind of tell you the story as opposed to a lot of the physical stuff, especially where they have that weird cold opening where it's all the people in monkey costumes banging, coming up and finding the obelisk, the device, the big, domino-shaped thing. That they find in the future as well, and all that stuff. So the plot line of it is very kind of it's very kind of up in the air. It's very loose, and the ending is also very loose. It's kind of supposed to be signaling, I think, the evolution of human beings on some kind of a genetic or psychological level. But aside from that, you could take what you want from the ending. I think that's one of the great things about 2001 is three people can watch 2001, and all three of them can have a different opinion on what the fuck the movie meant. That's one of the great things about 2001 is you can literally sit an entire crowd of people down and they can all get something different out of that film in some way, because a lot of it is just expressionary and visual. And Kubrick was really good at that, especially with the slow shots and stuff, and a lot of the panning shots and things that he did. It worked very well for that film. Now, moving on to the last one from him is his Stephen King adaptation, which is The Shining. Now, The Shining is, you can argue a lot of it is carried by Jack Nicholson, but I think Kubrick also carries an equal or greater amount of it, because the visuals in that movie are great. You have the scene with the little girls, the very tight intercuts of the bloody stuff happening, the scene with Jack Nicholson and the decaying woman, the weird visuals that almost make no sense and kind of make you think what the hell is going on. Some of it is just for disorientation, like the weird thing about the guy in the dog suit giving the dude a blowjob. There's a bunch of weird stuff in that movie, kind of when you go towards the end, but it's also meant to represent, the decaying mind of Jack Nicholson's character of Jack Torrance. So, you have that. You have some of the great lines in that movie, which honestly, Jack Nicholson probably subbed the best one of "Here's Johnny," like the Johnny Carson show, when he knocks the hole in the door with the axe. But regardless, it's still a great horror entry, and it showed that Kubrick could do, hard horror. He could stay in the horror genre and not kind of mix it with something else, which is really what Clockwork Orange was to an extent. It was mixed with kind of this dystopian sci-fi thing. But then when you look at The Shining, it's very much steeped in actual horror, and Kubrick did a very good job with that as well. That's why I like to refer to some of those guys as Renaissance directors. They can kind of do everything. So now let's move down onto number 6, and number 6 is Robert Zemeckis. Now Robert Zemeckis is, some people like to call him the discount Spielberg. I think he has his own style. It is similar to Spielberg in a certain extent, but I really do like a lot of the movies that he's made. And I'm going to go into the first one, and this is, I think, the strongest entry in the Back to the Future franchise, and that is Back to the Future Part 2. And the reason why I think it's the strongest entry is because it really does, make the original film. It builds on that so much in the second film, and it takes it to such a level. They kind of step it back a little bit with the third one, but I really like Part 2. It goes all out. It goes zany. It shows you the future. It shows you all these things that, it's not just traveling into the past. It's not just what we've seen. It's what we're going forward to, which ironically, technically now that date from that movie is actually in our past now. But again, I like what Zemeckis was able to do with the film. I like how he was able to build on his original work and build it into something that looked and felt amazing. And also, the acting between Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd was great. You had the guy that played Biff Tannen. You had, George and, well, not technically George McFly because there was a whole issue with Crispin Glover with that movie. But you had a vast majority of the actors coming back from the first film, and it worked very, very well. And the fact that they filmed this film and Part 3 back to back, I think, worked for them very well as well. I should say very well as well, but I think choosing to film both of those back to back was a good choice, even though it was probably a living hell for Robert Zemeckis. And then the next one from him is Who Framed Roger Rabbit? And the reason why I picked this is not just because I like the story, not just because I like the aesthetic and the art and stuff that's involved in it. I like the story. I like hard-boiled detective stories. And this is really kind of, this really falls into that vein, except, it's with Looney Tunes and Disney characters. And also the fact that they got Looney Tunes and Disney characters to be in the same movie is actually kind of insane when you stop and think about it, considering how those companies have kind of gone back and forth over the years. But Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The stuff, all the special effects they had to do, where they had to have the Weasel Gang holding real guns, and they were actually just they had digitally removed strings and stuff that they were hanging off of. Bob Hoskins does a great job as Eddie Valiant. You see, Roger, I can't remember the actor who voices Roger Rabbit, but, he does an amazing job. All the voice acting in the movie is great. All the animation in the movie is great. I can't say enough good things. They also snuck some sneaky sex things in there because, again, it's Looney Tunes and Disney. They always do that. So, moving on from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, now there's another film that I don't think it gets attention, but it's one of his more recent films. That's Flight with Denzel Washington, and I really like that movie because it wasn't your typical Zemeckis film, but it was still a very good movie. And the issue with and I shouldn't say the issue, but the thing with that movie is Denzel Washington is supposed to be this character who's kind of gripped by the issues that he's having, where he's a pilot and a plane is about to crash. The malfunction is not his fault, and he's able to land the plane successfully and save everyone on it. Now, it is then found out that he was, basically the whole thing is him grappling with the idea of, because he was drunk and stoned and fucked up when he was flying the plane, they're claiming that may have been the fault of the accident, even though there's really no proof to support it. And it's about him basically dealing with that kind of ruining his already kind of shitty life. And it's a great movie. It shows a lot of drama. Denzel Washington does a great job in it as the main character. The effects in it are really good for the plane crash and stuff like that. That works really well. So I really do like that movie, and it shows kind of the versatility that Zemeckis was able to do with a lot of his filmmaking. And the reason why I didn't pick Forrest Gump or Castaway is because I hate Forrest Gump as a character. I like the movie. I just don't like him as a character. Castaway, I felt, was kind of an obvious choice, and also that was kind of a movie that it was kind of overhyped when it came out. I don't think it's a bad film, but I think that it stuck around maybe a bit longer than it should have. And maybe that was because it was a carryover from Forrest Gump with Tom Hanks, where you're doing Castaway with Tom Hanks, and then I carried forward with that because directors and actors sometimes get linked like that. But moving on from that, I'd like to go into my number 5 pick, which is Alfred Hitchcock. Now, with Hitchcock, he was always the guy that he was kind of the first director, or one of the first directors, where it was like, oh, let's go watch the hit. It wasn't, oh, let's go watch Psycho, let's go watch Rear Window. It's, oh, let's go watch the new Hitchcock movie. He was that guy. He was the start of that guy. He was, what Nolan and Tarantino and Scorsese and stuff like that. He's what they owe that to. And really, I want to highlight 3. And they're very different versions of kind of thrillers and horror, but he was able to ace them all. And the first one I'm going to go into is Psycho. And Psycho is a film with, I don't even think I need to explain too much of it. I think everybody knows the plot of Psycho. Everybody knows the plot of Norman Bates. and Janet Leigh's character and all that, and how that all factors in, and Mother and all that stuff. I think everybody knows that. I don't think I really need to explain it, but the thing is, if you do watch the movie, all the subtle things that Hitchcock does with it, where he has the taxidermied animals in Norman Bates's office at the Bates Motel, and it's they're all staring at Marion Crane, and it's such a very it's frightening, but it's also an intimidating scene, not just for the audience, because they film into the faces of a lot of these animals, and a lot of them look like they're in various forms of rage. It's an extremely interesting scene, and it just shows that the set design that they had was amazing. The peephole in the wall, the scenes with the in the bathroom, which the first scene ever with a toilet, which is a weird kind of thing, I guess. But stuff like that. Psycho was the prototype for the '80s slasher. It really was, and it eventually became an '80s slasher after a little while, because of various things. Because obviously they wanted to bring it back because of the slasher boom, so they came out with Psycho 2. Even though I do like Psycho 2. I don't think that's a terrible film, but it pales in comparison to the first movie, especially with the twist at the ending. Everybody, when you haven't seen Psycho and you watch the ending, everybody goes, "What the fuck?" Every single person goes that when Marion Crane's sister turns that chair around, and you just and you see what's sitting there. Everybody has that reaction, and it's a great reaction to have. That is an amazing ending to an amazing film. And another one I'm going to go into that's a little bit different, which deals on the subject of voyeurism, is Rear Window. Now that's with Jimmy Stewart, who also was in several other Hitchcock outings, like Vertigo. But in this one, he's a reporter with a camera, really a photographer, who has had his pelvis broken, so he's stuck in a full cast. He can't move until he's healed, and he's basically just stuck doing nothing, listening to the radio in this heat wave and watching his neighbors. And at some point, he believes one of his neighbors has actually committed a murder, and that is the really, really big part of that movie, is the suspense of is what we're assuming true, and is what the audience is assuming true. Because sometimes in that movie, Jimmy Stewart is very sure of what he's seen, and the audience hasn't seen the same thing that he's saying he's seen. He's saying, "Oh, this man killed his wife." Well, we haven't actually seen that, though. It leaves it kind of up for suspense, the idea of whether or not what is it, just paranoia, or did he actually kill his wife? And you also get to follow kind of the lives of the other people that are in this little cul-de-sac area in between these apartment buildings, and it's the voyeurism of watching your neighbors and just kind of seeing what's going on, and you get to learn who all these people are through Jimmy Stewart's eyes, which is very interesting. So it gives that element of voyeurism, and it does it very, very well. And again, the ending is amazing. I love the ending, even though it is kind of cornbally with the whole camera thing. And the last one is The Birds, and The Birds was a step forward for Hitchcock in terms of technical aspects. With The Birds, they had fake birds, they had real birds. They had to get the birds to attack children and stuff like that. They had these amazing scenes. It had some of the some very early gore scenes where people having their eyes and stuff pecked out and shit. There was a lot of shock value with that film as well, and I think Hitchcock knew that. And then you have Tippi Hedren, who's the main character in that, and she's basically just being besieged by these birds over the course of this movie and watching them just murder people. And it's an interesting premise because it takes the idea of kind of that 1950s style monster movie, like a Them or something like that, but it makes it a bit more realistic enough for people to actually be afraid of it. Or the idea can a bird actually swoop down and peck your eyes out? Yes, it's a possibility it could happen, but usually there's a reason behind that, you're going to go grab an egg out of its nest or something. Usually birds don't just usually attack out of nowhere for no reason, but in this movie they do, and that's kind of the idea, is that this is a real threat. It's kind of similar to the idea of Jaws, the idea that there could be a shark. In this idea, there could be a bird or a seagull or a hawk or something that could swoop down and do that to you. So it played on a somewhat real fear. But like I said, I don't really know the idea of in terms of what you're playing around with, if he was doing some kind of a homage to maybe an older science fiction film or something like that. But I think Hitchcock, even if he was, I think Hitchcock put his own spin on it enough where it was very, very original. Again, I like the special effects in the movie. The bird's eye shots in the movie, no pun intended, are very good, and they're meant to show you the perspective of basically the monster or the creature, that kind of an idea. I love the camera work in the film. There's several scenes. There's one where Tippi Hedren looks up in this room and the ceiling is open and all these birds are just waiting there, and then they converge on her and start pecking at her and try to peck her eyes out and stuff. Great scenes, great special effects. But I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to move down to number 4. Number 4 is Steven Spielberg. And Spielberg is, again, one of those Renaissance directors. He's one of those guys who's kind of done a little bit of everything. And really, the majority of the stuff I really love from him is his horror and thriller stuff along with his adventure films. I'm not really a huge fan of war films in general. They're not my thing. I'm not saying they're bad movies, just saying it's not a movie that I would sit down and watch for enjoyment, let's put it that way. Originally I was thinking of doing Saving Private Ryan on this list, but, I decided to go with a different lineup. So, the first one is Raiders. And Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones film, I would consider the best Indiana Jones film. Really, it exemplified what Spielberg was able to do with a fun plot line and with a George Lucas script. And he was able to do that again 2 more times with Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. I will not talk about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull here. I hope they do not make number 5 even. But Raiders, that first one, it was a movie that was kind of bloody. It reminded me a lot, and again, George Lucas kind of based it around this to an extent of almost like a comic script, like a Phantom or a Shadow or something like that. Like this guy who's kind of running around and or maybe like not G.I. Joe, but like a Sergeant Rock or something like that. A World War II soldier who's running around. Or a guy during World War II was running around Nazi Germany and trying to get all these historical artifacts, and there's all these supernatural things that are going on, at least near the end of the film. And again, it's an interesting movie. It's got a great villain. The villains of this movie, even though they're kind of cartoony, they're great, and their comeuppance scene is even better. And this was kind of a film that was aimed at kids, and they have melting faces in it, so I can't fault Spielberg for that. That was a good choice by him. Now moving on to really one of probably what is my favorite Spielberg film, which is Jaws. And Jaws, it was an early film by Spielberg. It was his second movie. And Jaws is really this film that it was a film from hell to do. The technical stuff that was involved in it was ridiculous. It's why Spielberg warned other directors and other actors, do not do a movie out on the ocean. You will regret it. But in the end, the product does show for itself that he was able to get an amazing film out of what they did get, especially that third act. And I love the acting of Robert Quinn, Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Schneider. They all do a great job as the 3 individual leads. And well, really, Roy Schneider is the lead as Chief Brody, and then kind of Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Quinn and Robert Shaw are really the 2 main side characters. But the thing is, they both do steal the show in various scenes. And they have a lot of footage in this stuff that's really great. The shark attacking the shark cage was actually something that was filmed by these B-roll people that were trying to get shark shots for them to edit into the movie. So that was a great one. You had stuff, the stuff with the barrels and stuff like that. Because again, they couldn't show the shark too much because of the mechanical failures that were happening with it. So they had to kind of work with what they had. And the stuff with the barrels I thought was really good because there's these bright yellow barrels. They stand out against everything. And as soon as those show up, the shark is there. Something's going down as soon as one of those barrels pops up out of the water. So it's a great one. And then on top of that, that they're basically screwed at various points because this thing is massive. And they show the thing, coming out of the water and chomping on the chum and stuff. That shot where it actually comes out of the water and eats the chum and then goes back down, and Roy Schneider just bolts up and right into the camera frame and backs up and says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." That is an amazing line, and it is an amazing moment in that film. And I do agree with Spielberg in the idea of changing the ending where he blows up the shark, even though the writer of the original book said that was a stupid idea because it doesn't actually work, and they actually tested it. It wouldn't work. But it makes a memorable ending where they blow up the shark, and Spielberg was right. I have them hooked for the first 2 hours. I'll have them hooked for the last 10 minutes. Or whatever the time frame was that he had. But basically that was the idea, is if I have them hooked for this long, they'll believe whatever the hell I do. So he's not wrong, and it was a great ending to a great film. And now I'm going to move into my last one from him, which is Duel. And Duel is a movie that is the precursor to Jaws. It was actually a made-for-television film. But it's this great movie of kind of this idea where it's this guy who's driving cross country, and he's going through various points of the Southwest, the desert, and he runs into this truck driver who just won't leave him alone, and he doesn't know who it is. He never finds out who it is, and the truck driver is repeatedly trying to kill him along the way. And it's kind of interesting to see this man kind of in this foreign territory where nobody really likes him or knows him, trying to explain to people that he's being stalked by a truck driver who wants to murder him, and everybody just kind of looks at him like he's nuts. But in reality, we're watching the movie. We know it's true. We know that there is a truck driver who's legitimately, for whatever reason, trying to kill him. And I think it's just because he's getting a little chippy with him on the road. Like, he passed him once on the highway, and then the truck passes him, and then he passes the truck again, and then now the truck has to murder him. That's the epitome of road rage, I guess. But I do love Duel, and Duel. Even the truck itself, they modified the truck. They welded an I-beam onto the fucking bumper of the truck to make it more intimidating, which I think is hilarious. But that's why I love Duel. Duel's an amazing movie, and it really, if you want to watch a good, duality, watch Duel and then watch Jaws. Because Spielberg actually considered Jaws the spiritual successor to Duel. So, they're two movies that are kind of fun to watch together. But now let's go down to number 3, and number 3 is John Carpenter. And John Carpenter is, I think, the best horror director that I have on this list, the best pure horror director. And I love his movies. I love a great many of his movies. I'm going to highlight 3 of the ones that I like, but really a lot of these are interchangeable too, the movies that I'm naming from him. But these are just 3 that I generally like. And of course, The Thing, I've mentioned it multiple times. I don't think I need to go over that any more than I already have. Great performances by Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, rest in peace. Keith David, all the other actors that were in that film. Amazing jobs. Special effects was out of this world. John Carpenter's directing, the tense moments, the music by Ennio Morricone, everything about that movie makes it a perfect horror movie. But moving over to Halloween. Now, Halloween is, again, another one that's kind of been talked to death, but I haven't really talked about it a whole lot on this channel. And the thing is, I really do enjoy Halloween because it is the prototypical slasher. You can tell where things evolved from by watching Halloween. It's kind of like watching a slasher at almost its basest form. Or an 80s slasher, at least. Psycho, I said, was kind of the precursor to the slashers, but Halloween kind of perfected the formula, I guess, what you want to say. The idea of this masked psychopath, running around and slashing up teenagers for no other reason than he wants to. I'm talking specifically about the first film, not the sequels where they expand on that, or the different universes now where they expand on that. But the first film in general, and the idea too, the idea of this, psychopath who murdered his sister at a young age, as 7 or 8 years old, and then he's been in an insane asylum for years and years and years, and Donald Pleasence is his psychiatrist, and he's trying to hunt him down. And again, the end of the movie, the climax, you don't need a whole lot of blood for this type of a movie. Jamie Lee Curtis does a great job. The special effects we do see are relatively good. Michael Myers is not this unstoppable tank in this movie like he turns into in the sequels. He actually does have a fair amount of vulnerability when Jamie Lee Curtis stabs him at one point with the knitting needle in the neck, and she stabs him in the eye with the coat hanger and stuff. And again, great moments, and also the idea is that where you think he's dead, and then he just kind of sits back up, or he comes back into the scene. They do a great job with shadow work and that kind of background stuff in this type of a movie. It's great. But then we move on to another one that I really enjoy by him, which is Prince of Darkness. And again, this is a carryover. You have Donald Pleasence coming over from obviously the Halloween series, and you also have Victor Wong coming over from Big Trouble in Little China. He played Egg Shen. As well as, I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy that played Wang in Big Trouble in Little China as well comes over from that film. But Prince of Darkness was kind of one of those comeback movies that Carpenter tried to do, where, he had done The Thing, which again, I think is an amazing movie, but it was a box office flop. It wasn't received very well anywhere. The people that directed the original basically called it a piece of garbage, which again, I don't know what movie they were watching. But after that, he decided to go a little bit smaller, and he wound up doing a film called Prince of Darkness. Now, Prince of Darkness is kind of based around the idea of combining science and religion involving the devil, and it's basically about this organic green slime that they find in the cellar of this like monastery that's located in some derelict neighborhood somewhere, and almost looks like a bombed out warehouse almost, or like an old school building or something. And in the basement, they have this big, massive, like Zordon sized vial of just green liquid that is apparently the devil. And it does various things. It flows into people and mutates them, brings them back to life as zombies and shit. And again, I really did enjoy the film. It's a little bit of a departure from maybe kind of your classic John Carpenter stuff that's a bit more, I don't want to say grounded, but maybe a little bit less, visually shocking. It doesn't go overly heavy on the effects, but I don't think it has to. And it has a great cameo by Alice Cooper, by the way. That is a hilarious cameo, is when he's as the king of the zombie bum people. But like I said, the movie itself I enjoy. The premise is a little goofy, but I think it works in that film. And the tension that Carpenter is able to build is legitimate, as well as, bringing over people that were cast that he was familiar with from previous films, so they knew how to work with him. And I think that helps with the film in general. But, I'm going to go through John Carpenter, and we're going to go down to my number 2, and my number 2 is Mel Brooks. And this should be no surprise for anybody that's watched this channel for more than, a couple of months. I love Mel Brooks. He's my favorite comedy director. I don't think I've seen a film by Mel Brooks that I did not like. But I'm going to name 3 of them here, and they're probably ones that you've all heard of. Some of the last couple of these are interchangeable. The first one is not. The first one is Blazing Saddles. And this movie is amazing in every single way. It's one of the funniest comedies ever made. Mel Brooks pulls no punches. He does everything, goes balls to the wall. It's horrible in so many ways, and it's hilarious in so many more. I can't say enough good things about it. I don't want to give anything away. Cleveland Little does a great job as Sheriff Bart. Gene Wilder comes in and almost steals the show as the Waco Kid. You have Slim Pickens coming in. I said he was going to get brought up again. Slim Pickens coming in as Taggart. Harvey Korman, a Brooks regular, coming in. Mel Brooks himself. Madeline Kahn, who also comes in for this. A lot of people that were familiar with Mel Brooks from the early days, during the producers and stuff like that. They came in for this. Ultimately, it's an amazing film. I can't say enough good things about it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's hilarious. And that leads me into his other film from 1974, which was another major hit, starring Peter Boyle, which was Young Frankenstein. Now, most people would probably remember Peter Boyle as the dad on Everybody Loves Raymond, the granddad, basically. But he was great as the monster in Young Frankenstein, and this is back very, very early in his career. Gene Wilder comes back. Cloris Leachman is in this. Marty Feldman, who plays Igor, again, his jokes almost steal the show on their own. If you're a horror fan, it's a great movie. It's filmed in black and white as a homage to the original Frankenstein. It's such a fun movie to just sit down and watch. It's got that classic Mel Brooks style humor. There's so many goofy scenes in it. Gene Wilder has some of the best timing of his career. The entire movie is just a laugh fest from beginning to end. And again, it's a lot like Blazing Saddles. It's one of those movies where there's a lot of, or Blazing Saddles and Dr. Strangelove, where you can rewatch that movie and you can find these little funny things that Mel Brooks was just inserting into the backgrounds of these rooms. It's hilarious when you watch it. But it's also a very good homage to, the classic films from James Whale. And then you go to another one, which was, it made a lot of money. It wasn't as well received, but it's still a great, funny, and hilarious film. And it's his foray into the science fiction genre, which is Spaceballs. Now, Spaceballs is one of those movies that never really... It's so funny because Star Wars is still relevant. So as long as Star Wars is relevant to an extent, Spaceballs is relevant, which is hilarious that Mel Brooks managed to piggyback along that. But I love it. The first movie, Bill Pullman, John Candy, Joan Rivers, so many great, funny actors in this movie that just do a great job at coming in and, hamming the living shit out of it. Rick Moranis is Darth Helmet. Whoever the guy is that plays Colonel Sanders. I mean, they even put a chicken joke in there just because he's named Colonel Sanders, or he's named Colonel Sanders specifically so they could do a chicken joke. There's so many quotable lines from that film. It was one of those things, like, once you watch Star Wars, then you had to watch Spaceballs because it was one of those things like now you'll get all the damn jokes. They even have that little cameo role with Michael Winslow from Police Academy where he's making all the sound effects for the radio, which is fucking amazing. But I don't want to go too much into that because I want to get finally to my number one. And my number one favorite director is Ridley Scott. And Ridley Scott has made some of my favorite films of all time. And I want to dive into one of his earlier ones, and that is Alien. Now, Alien has obviously launched a massive franchise post the first film. However, the first film is still my favorite out of the bunch, even beating out Aliens, which was done by James Cameron 7 years later. Because Alien was this very claustrophobic, hardcore kind of science fiction-y type of film. It was a dirty, grimy kind of science fiction, almost like taking the grime from Star Wars and making it grimier. You had this great cast with Sigourney Weaver and Ian Holm. Again, rest in peace. He died recently too. Yaphet Kotto. Tom Skerritt. A great group of kind of maybe not veteran, but seasoned actors. Sigourney Weaver, I think that was a very early role for her, but a lot of those other people were well-seasoned actors at that point. So it definitely helped the film, I think, by doing that. Some of the scenes in it, the scenes in the ventilation system with Dallas, those are some of the most tense scenes, I think, in movie history. And then the payoff for it is great, where he turns around and the thing is right there. It's an amazing scene, and all the other people can see is just the little motion tracker thing that they have that they've jerry-rigged to try and find the creature. And of course the chest burster scene with John Hurt, and I almost forgot to mention John Hurt, but the chest burster scene with him, which is again one of the most shocking scenes in film history, and nobody on that set realized that was going to happen. They didn't tell them. So they all got splattered with blood, and a lot of those reactions were legitimate, which I find even more hilarious. Again, an amazing film. I can't say enough good things about it. 1979 was a good year. All I can say is that. And then also the designs by H.R. Giger, that Ridley Scott implemented into the film. Amazing designs. I wish Giger had done more art for films. The only two that I know of that he did was Alien and Species, but I wish he had kind of done more because his designs are actually very, very interesting. And he also won an Academy Award for that, I believe, for Best Costume Design or Best Character Design, possibly. But Ridley Scott ultimately made that film as creepy and claustrophobic and as violent and as awesome as it was. Even the Ash decapitation scene is amazing too. That all the special effects involved in that is except for that one little shot where they're placing his head and it's very obviously fake. Other than that one shot, it all works together, but I understand some of the limitations of the time. But now you move over into my next favorite film of his, which honestly you could probably rotate the two on any day of the week, and I might tell you one or the other, is Blade Runner with Harrison Ford. And this is why this is sad to me, is that Blade Runner was the only time that Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford worked together because they butted heads so much that Harrison Ford didn't want to work with them anymore. And that's a shame because Blade Runner is an amazing movie. Blade Runner is it's a noir film that they made science fiction and they made it seamless. And all the visuals and all the scores, that smooth jazz for the scores, all the lines in it, Rutger Hauer playing Roy Batty, and oh God, why can't I remember her name? The character, the actress that plays Daryl Hannah, who plays Pris, that was one of her first movie roles. Again, Harrison Ford was coming off of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Empire Strikes Back 2 years before that, so this was a big movie for him. Edward James Olmos comes in as the cop on the side there, who has kind of it's an interesting kind of role. A lot of people remember him because of the dialogue and the look and stuff like that, and the little, origami stuff that he used to do, which was kind of it was a calling card of his character, which I liked. So he kind of got into fans' minds because of the because of the quirk, maybe not because of the character, because there isn't really too much to the character. And then Sean Young, obviously, as the android Rachel, who doesn't know she's an android. But that's the thing, is that Blade Runner explores deep themes, and it explores the theme of what it actually is to be human. And again, an amazing movie. I wish I had that goddamn Magnum that he has, because that thing looks awesome. But again, the designs, the way the movie looks, the way that it's shot, The special effects and stuff in it, they're all amazing. I love Blade Runner. And now we're going to get to kind of the last one. And even though this is kind of the last, the tertiary one for me for Scott, it's still a really great film, and I love watching it. And that is Gladiator with Russell Crowe. And I know that's kind of a generic one. It did win Best Picture in 2000, but I like Gladiator because it's a very kind of basic story of revenge. It's the idea of this guy got fucked over basically because a rich kid wanted to throw a bitch fit, and now he's going to get his revenge. And that is one of the best things in that movie is just you get the payoff. That's the thing is you're waiting the entire movie for the payoff, and you get the payoff. It's a bit of a bittersweet ending, but you understand it and you kind of expect it a little bit by the end of the film. But you get the payoff, and that's what Scott does very well is he makes that payoff worth it. You get to watch all the pain and torture that Russell Crowe's character goes through over the course of the film until you get to the point where he actually gets to fight Comicus, who's played by Joaquin Phoenix. Again, he does a great job as well. So you have all that stuff that's going on in the movie. In addition, the sword fighting, the choreography, all the stuff in the movie. I love the action scenes. They're really, really good. Russell Crowe does an amazing job. He really did get, kind of, for the time, I would guess, jacked for the movie. I wouldn't say he was outrageously ripped, but he was definitely believable as the character. And again, the following year he would do Cinderella Man, and he was on kind of a really good kind of hit streak there for a while with, in the late 90s through the early 2000s. And I enjoy Gladiator. They did toy around with doing a sequel to it at one point, I guess, but God, I hope that never happens. But it's a great movie. It's a great little contained story, and I love the way that it looks. I love the way that the plot line goes. It doesn't require anything too complex. It's a revenge story, but the characters are really what makes it so enjoyable to watch. But that rounds out my top 10. But I want to know what you guys think. What are your top 10 directors, or top 5, or top 3, or whatever, however many you can think up, and why do you like them? What movies do you like from them? Put that in the comments below. I'd like to know. Make sure to hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?